Okay, Patsy, so could you start off maybe just tell us a little about where you were born and what it was like at that stage?
Well, where we're standing, Ollie, is directly where I was born. Just underneath this castle here is one of the houses. There was 4 houses here, and that was the last one under the castle. That's where I was born, and that's where I grew up, right here in Jenkins Lane. I went on to go to the school then here in St. Patrick's, which is just opposite the church, now gone unfortunately. And I also served on the altar in St. Patrick's, and I grew up, all my life I grew up here, in the street.
The houses in Jenkins Lane, they would be kind of classified as tenements?
Tenements, yeah. There was 4 small houses, and then there was 2 big tenement houses, which each tenement housed 6 families, 2, 2 and 2. And
so each family be in a room kind of thing?
Yeah, each family would have their own, well, there would be just 2 rooms in each tenement, and that was it. You had 6 families, grew up.
And what about things like water or toilets?
Well, toilets were outdoor toilet here. It was just at the back of us here. You had an outdoor toilet, and then you had a pump, a running pump here, one of the old type pumps, and you got your buckets of water from the pump, brought them to your house and used them for your washing up, to make your tea and what have you,
I mean, can you remember some of the families that were living here at that time?
Yeah, I do. I have the Morans, and you have who else do you have? The Doyles, you have the Whites, you have the you have the Ryans, you have the Dohertys. You had, the Welshes, and they changed. Some people died. There was old people living here as well, and they died, and a young family came in and took their place. I'm talking now about back in the 50s,
And there was lots of children.
And there was children all over here, all over the street. There was children. I was one of them, and it was a magical time. We had nothing, yet we had everything.
And what kind of games did the children play?
There was all games that were made up. We played here in the lane here. We played Chinese, or marbles as you call it. We played Bucky Bano. You might remember that, Ollie. Yeah, it was kind of a made-up game where you stood up against the wall and there was 2 or 3 people behind with their hands. You had to try and jump, and if you didn't make the top guy's back, you went to the back, and the other fella took him, and he had to try and do it. It was silly, simple old games. And then you had the lashing, where 2 fellas had a rope and we all ran, and they ran, and when they caught a fella, they lashed him to the rope and they dragged him with them, and they caught everyone, There were those kind of things,
Like taken away, huh?
Yeah, and then you had football, and then we had hurling as well down here. Because behind me here, you didn't have a car park here. This was a big square, and at the back of the square you had Harvey's printers, and you had a delivery depot there as well, underground. And you had, over here came the horse and cars with paper, rolls of paper that went down this. They opened up 2 big trapdoors, and it went down the trapdoors into the stores of Harvey's. So behind us, this was all a big play area here,
So CIE used to deliver with a horse and car?
Yeah, horse and car then. Yeah, there was no trucks then. Horse and car came over, and
And what other industries were around here?
Well, I didn't have industries as
sorry,
such. Harvey Printers would be about the biggest, and then after that you had just shops. You had all the shops around,
Furniture crowd?
Yeah, well, of course, the big industry here at manufacturing was Hearn's Cabinet Factory, and they were the big ones, and they employed a lot of men, and they were all highly skilled carpenters, highly skilled tradesmen, and they made furniture for all the churches all over Ireland. They were the people.
And during all the people that lived in Jenkins Lane, where would the fathers have worked at that stage?
Well, my own father worked in McDonald's Creamery, McDonald's margarine factory, and they were based down opposite the park, just across from 3 Ships, just up from there, and he worked there. And a lot of them worked on the docks, down on the docks, and then some of them worked on the cattle boats with the cattle and that, and then a lot of them then were labourers on buildings.
And they'd be very dirty industries.
Oh yeah, there was no clean industries then, no gowning up like in our present day in some of the industries. They were. My father was the only one in a clean industry, and McDonald's decided to move and go to Drogheda, and he wouldn't move because he had a young family. So he got a redundancy package, wouldn't it be now? When we say a redundancy package, it was just a few, but it was a lot then at that time. So the first thing he had to do, of course, he had promised my mother, Mary Bridget, was to buy her a radio. And that was because nobody in the lane had a radio. So he bought her a radio, and the radio was huge. It was about 2.5 feet, the radio. And
The old valve one.
yeah, the old big ones, you know. And he had two other men got with him, and they made a stand for this, put up on the wall. This was prized thing, and this went up on the wall in this house just behind me. And every evening at about 6:30, 7:15, there was a little knock on the door, and the door was open, and Mary came in, and Bridgie came in, and Tommy came in, and he had his little stool with him, and they sat down, and that was turned on at 7 o'clock, and you had the Archers, and then you had Dick Barton, Special Agent, and they were all looking up at this radio as if it was the big silver screen, you know. And they were there until maybe 9 o'clock, 9:30, to listen to the news. And at that time, I remember Lord Haw-Haw. If you remember him, during the Second World War, he was on with his propaganda. They used to listen to that, you know. But that was every night they'd come in. And Sunday afternoon, the window, it was near the ground, of course, half of that was taken in, and that radio was put out on a table outside the window. And all the men sat down around, and they listened to Micheál O'Hare and all the GAA match, and mugs of tea were handed out to him with soda bread and what have you, you know.
You should have charged.
Osh, in those days, well, when I say we handed it out, the women would bring up the soda bread and mugs. The same in the house when they were listening to the radio. They'd bring up their mugs with them. They'd make the tea and they'd have bread and that. And it was a real community thing. We were the only one who had the radio at the time, and that was a big thing to have that, you know.
I mean, there was that kind of sense of community, wasn't there?
Oh, there was. Yeah, nobody locked doors. We had a half door, top and bottom. None of the doors, there was a bolt on the bottom half, and the top door was only a latch. So you just pulled down it, opened it, went in. But nobody locked their doors. Of course, we had a Savoy cinema just around the corner from us, and that was magic. You know, we wouldn't have the money to go there. But as youngsters, we went over, particularly on a Sunday evening, we sat down over by the corner and we watched the crowds, and I mean crowds coming in to see the films from 6:30 on. And they're queuing up outside, just around the corner here from us, and down in the front as well, to the Savoy. And they'd queue up, and you had two commissioners, they'd lay in their regalia and their cap, and they'd be controlling the crowds. And that was magic, you know.
And do you remember getting into the Savoy?
Oh yeah. We used to steal in, you know. We used to we'd go into there was the highty-tighty place, and then there was the ordinary place up near the screen. So it was up near the screen we had to go. But we often went into the hallway, and you had your usherette, and we'd always say to her that there was some lads outside creating trouble. So she'd run out with her torch, come outside it, and one of our lads would slip in. So we'd be two of us telling our three of us, but one would slip in. But sometimes they were caught because they'd go into a seat, and then there might be a guy after going to the toilet. He'd come back looking for his seat, and he was caught, you know. Because at that time, you'd notice every house was full, every seat was full in there, you know. But they were magic times, you know, to see it, you know.
What other entertainment? I mean, okay, you mentioned Savoy. Is there any other entertainment that you can remember?
Well, what I used to, as a young lad here, I used to go up to was up to the carnival up in the barracks. You're kind of located there, aren't you? And that was magic every year, you know, Father Farrell. And that went on for 3 or 4 weeks. But you made your own entertainment, and there was no entertainment laid on for you. You made it yourself.
And what about the Tramore train? Did you ever
Oh yeah, my mother used to bring us, you know, twice a year. We were lucky, and she'd bring us down. But my mother had 3 or 4 of us, but there'd be about 10 go with her. You know, she'd buy 4 tickets, but be about 10 go on board. And it wasn't just her. Every mother did it, you know. And that's the way it went. Tramore was brilliant. I mean, we went out for a day, but I mean, nowadays you can pop in and out when you want, but that was only twice a year, maybe only once a year, you know. And it was a magic time, but you never forgot that, you know. And that football was again you played, and hurling, and then we went up in the Corrigan Park, which was just over us. There was a huge big place up there, a big field, and we played games, you know, played hurling and football up there, you know.
And would it be a rivalry between Jenkins Street?
Oh God, yeah, Jenkins Lane and Corrigan Park was a big rivalry. And I had first cousins living up there, and we were deadly enemies. Oh, deadly enemies, you know. And that, but it was all good fun. It was all good fun, Ollie, you know, all good fun.
Will we go down to just around the corner to the church?
Well, we're standing here in the church, St. Patrick's Church, and you also had a school here. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this was the second school that Brother Rice founded. He founded the first one in the, what do you call it, down by, what do you call the lane? New Street, yeah. And the second one, I believe, was this one here, and then Mount Sion they came onto Mount Sion. This was St. Patrick's, and over here on my right, where the statue is, just down from that, you're 2 steps going down, into a door that brought you into the school, and the school was right behind us. It was 2 rooms, the ground floor and top floor, and you had 6 classes. You had 1st, 2nd and 3rd in the ground floor, and you had 4th, 5th and 6th in the top floor. And you had 2 Christian brothers from Mount Sion that came down. So I'm just thinking maybe it wasn't there before Mount Sion, it was just after Mount Sion. Just thinking of it now. They came from Mount Sion and they taught there,
And what was the difference between Mount Sion and this school?
Well, Mount Sion covered all up like Barrack Street and Cannon Street and that and out there. This school covered it covered all over. It covered, Georgia Street, O'Connell Street. It covered O'Brien Street, Stephen Street. It went down as far as Hennessy Road. Now, I think some of the lads that came in from Hennessy's Road didn't make it to Mount Sion for some reason.
So this would be for more deprived kids?
To a certain extent, yeah. It wouldn't be for all deprived kids, but it would have been for some. And I remember lads coming in here, and some in the winter time, no shoes with them coming in, and they walked in to get their education, and a lot of them turned out to be very, very good.
And what about things like, would the school have, would they have helped them out in any other way? Or?
Yeah, from the point of view of no shoes, every January the corporation gave out shoes to different schools. St. Patrick's was only a very small school, so they didn't get many pairs of shoes, but Mount Sion did. And the 2 brothers that were teaching here used to come down most mornings, and they'd have shoes in their pocket, their big cassock, and they'd have a right and a left shoe, and and they'd come into the class and they'd say, hands up those who wear a number 5 shoe, and maybe 2 or 3 hands go up and say, okay, I'm thinking of a number between 10, and whoever got the number, they got a pair of shoes to wear. And some of them had shoes, but they were nothing what they had on their feet, but most of them hadn't got any shoes, and that's how the brothers did it, And then a lot of them didn't. We had lunch or a break for dinner at 1 o'clock, but a lot of them never went home because there was no dinner to go to. But just behind me here on my left, you also had a building. It used to be called Lenin's, but thinking now, it was really a soup kitchen, because a lot of old men or elderly guys used to come up here and they go in there and they get a bowl of soup and they get bread, and the masters or the teachers used to bring in some of the lads and leave them in there, and they'll get their bowl of soup and they'd get their bread as well. So they were feeding them as well.
And who ran that?
I don't know whether it was a charitable organisation. I was very young at the time, Ollie, and I really didn't know. All I know is that they gave out food there, and they had. I remember I rambled in there one day, and I just barged into the queue, although I was only living up the road, but I went in and I got Coll cannon. But you didn't get anything with the Coll cannon. You didn't get meat, no way. But you got Coll cannon to eat, and that. But I started here. I was only about 4, I think, when I came down those steps from the.
Was it Osqueiliga or was it Ospira?
Well, it was most of it Osqueiliga, because back in those days when you did your exams, you got an extra 10% if you did it through Irish, and we did everything except English through Irish. Maths and geography, history. It's all done through Irish, and that.
And I believe you were a good scholar.
Well, I suppose I was and I wasn't, but I could never have gone on to Mount Sion to do secondary because my father couldn't afford it. But at that time there was what they call a Waterford Corporation scholarship, and they used to give 10 scholarships, but this was covering the whole city. You had lads from Mount Sion sitting in it, you had lads from the Manor School sitting in it. At that time you had a Manor School, you had here, and that. So there was about, I would say, maybe 100 lads sitting in it. And I was lucky, I suppose. I got one of those scholarships, and that's what put me through Mount Sion, through the secondary school, paid for my books and paid for wearing, clothing as well.
And would that been very rare to have someone go through secondary from your family?
Yeah, because my elder brother didn't. He went through here as well, and when he finished, he went working, and it just had to, because they hadn't the money, And you had to remember, back in those days, they were all big families. They weren't small families anymore. You had 5 and 6 in a family, or 7 and 8 in a family, and you only had one wage coming in. The mother was there the whole time. The father worked, and then most of the men working here in this parish were just builders, labourers. Some were, they were doing very small jobs. They had no big jobs then. There was only one wage going into the house.
There was also the old ladies' house.
Yeah, just where you're standing, just behind you, was St. Patrick's home, and this was for, I think it cared for maybe about 12 old people. You know, it was like an institution. We used to call it institution, and they were there, and there was about 12 of them there, and they were there. And it was only recently, I'd say, that this has closed down. You know.
And the actual church itself?
The church itself was. I made my communion there, and the statue that, I don't know, will you be filming it later on here? I got photograph taken underneath that when I made my communion. That's where all the photographs are taken when you made your communion, and then I made my confirmation, and this was a great church. You had the parish priest and a curate there, big community, and a lot of people went to the churches then. I remember in May, and I became an altar boy here, and in May, for the month of May, every night here was packed. Every night was packed. You know, people coming from all over, you know, the parish down for the May devotions. I mean, it was unbelievable, you know, packed out, you know.
I mean, at that stage, there was no scandals with the church or anything like that?
No, oh gosh, no, there was nothing like that. Actually, the church here in St. Patrick's, from what I can gather, was originally a corn mill. It's where they ground corn here, and then they converted it to a church. But then back in the penal days, when, you know, churches weren't allowed to be, they reverted back to a corn store and put corn in it and all the rest. But in between, they were saying mass here. And then until the penal days were over, then they brought it back to a church. So it's an old church, a lot of history there as well, an awful lot of history. And when I look inside the church now, as an altar boy, I thought it was huge, a massive church, and it was only just a small church. But then when you're small, everything looks so big and enormous, you know, and coming out on the altar and that. And then, of course, the mass was all in Latin then. You had to learn Latin. And this was a big thing, to learn the Latin, to reply to the priest, to answer the priest, and you had to do this in Latin.
So here's a young lad from a tenement.
Yes.
Doing school through Irish.
Yes.
Mass through Latin.
Latin. It beggars belief, but it was happening, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember, you know, it's funny, the things that stick in your head. The one bit of Latin always sticks in my head. I had to learn it first. It was ad deum qui latificat juvem tutum meum. What that means now, I don't know, but that was my first bit of mass Latin that I learned. And it always stuck in my mind. I don't know why, but it did stick in my mind, you know. But,
and did you sing in the choir?
No, and you know, the choir in St. Patrick's came from all over as well. They came from the Yellow Road. They came from Hennessy's Road. You had Mr. Devlin, who actually was the boss man of the Savoy Cinema. He was a very big bass, and he used to sing in the choir on Sundays. Big tall man with glasses. He was English. And then you had Kevin Nugent, who had a shop in Barrack Street, a grocer shop. He sang in the choir. And you had a man just in Georgia Street, Power. He was a music teacher, and he was the boss man in the choir. But they came from all over in the choir. They came from Ardnagrania to sing in St. Patrick's choir. So we were kind of a multi-denominational, if you could call it, I suppose, choir. But, you know, that was our choir here, you know, and we were on altar, we were the altar boys here, you know. And there was, at the time, now you could have had up to 12, 15 altar boys, you know.
And would you go off on, I think there used to be trips every year, was there?
Yeah, the parish kind of got a trip going for the altar boys and some of the choir as well, and they'd bring out big hampers, big old hampers that you see down on the stage, you know, for costumes, and they'd be out there they'd be getting ham from such a shop and bread from such a place. But it was just sandwiches you had nothing fancy now, no cakes or anything like that, and big bottles of O'Sullivan's, Jaffora, or lemonade, you know. And that went out Tramore for the day, and that was good. But it was great.
And can you remember, did you get any money as an altar boy for weddings and stuff like that?
Not really. Just people hadn't it, I suppose, you know. And then the weddings were, I suppose, yeah, they were kind of smallish as the weddings and that, you know. But you never got paid.
What was your first job?
My first job was when I left Mount Sinai after doing the leaving and that, I got a job in National Board and Paper Mills in the dispatch office, in the dispatch department in the office, and that's where I started. And I started and I worked there, and then I moved on from the dispatch office to the production end of it, in the mill end of it in the National Board and Paper Mills, in the mill office where you did all the agendas for running the machines and all that, you know. And there, I left from there, then I went to ACC, and I finished up then in ACC, you know.
So it was always in office work?
It was, yeah, office work, yeah, that's what I did, you know, and that, and Yeah, ACC then, of course, that's where I got involved with Tops of the Town with ACC.
Okay. So Patsy, just tell us how you got involved in shows. We're here. Where are we now? Tell us
where we're standing now. We used to be the old Flaggy Lane, and that ran up from on the Mall right up to the very top here, and crowds. That's where all the crowd gathered for Tops of the Town. You know, before the show, they'd be queuing up for tickets, and when tickets went on sale, in actual fact, they'd be queuing up at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the box office opened at 10. To get tickets for Tops of the Town. How I became involved, I was never into musical. I loved singing, but I never played an instrument. I never got involved with music as such. But I remember how I started. I started in pantomime here in the Theatre Royal with the Waterford Pantomime Society, and I played. They asked me to play a part as a villain. And I was always a lovely guy, but I played a part of the villain, and I went on that for years. I played the likes of Tommy Fitzgerald and Roger McGrath and all those, and that went on for years. And then I produced 1 or 2 pantomimes as well.
Any funny stories about being a baddie in the pantomime?
No, I mean, you'd always get to, the kids loved it, of course, and we played to the kids. I played to the kids, and so did the Dame, Tommy Fitzgerald and that. And pantomime was great, because pantomime, anything went in pantomime. You didn't have to be too good well, you had to have your lines, of course, but you played as much as you could. If the kids loved you, you stayed with the kids, and that was it. I love pantomime, From there, then I was working in ACC, and I got involved in the ACC shows then, for Tops of the Town, and they were magic. I mean, that was the golden era then, back in late 60s, 70s. That was the golden years of Tops of the Town, And
but it wasn't so commercial at that stage, was it?
No, you see, back in those days, it was really, you were judged on the talent on the stage, not, how you dressed the stage and what costumes you had on. You had to have certain costumes on, but I think it all changed when RTE got involved. They used to show the Dame on Easter Sunday night. They'd show the final night, and they had to have certain shows suitable for television. So shows then were kind of gearing for that. In other words, big shows with plenty of costumes and all that, but little talent, And unfortunately, that's what happened. But in Waterford, it was great. Waterford was the big place, for Tops of the Town. And we won it more times, I say, in Waterford than any other county,
And it's amazing that now it's gone. It's all history now.
Yeah, unfortunately, it became too expensive. Companies just couldn't afford it anymore because the price of costumes, and also what happened was television came on stream. And then a lot of people who were involved with Tops, where when you'll be doing Tops, you'll be rehearsing 3 nights a week, and Saturday afternoon. And all of a sudden, they hadn't time anymore, I mean, they were watching television and that, and you just couldn't, Back those days, you hadn't a problem, And then, as I say, the big one was, it just was too expensive,
And you also, before you got involved in Tops of the Town, you said you were involved in the Waterford Dramatic Society.
That was only a once-off. I was doing pantomime, and Harry Geraghty was doing a play called Untreel. And it was the story of a young girl became pregnant in rural Ireland, and back in those days, that was a no-no. It's a mortal sin, and she was sent off to Dublin to have the baby and that, and she died, and they brought her back, and I was the bad guy again. I was the one who got her into trouble, and she was brought home, and she was set out at home in the home, and I went up to cough, and I was to go up and have a look at her and nod my head and turn up my collar, shrug my shoulders and go off again and look for somebody else. And Harry, I didn't live that down for a long time, but anyway, Harry caught me on that, But I mean, that was the only time I really got involved in WDS, but Waterford Dramatic Society were brilliant in Waterford. They were big in Waterford. They had some great actors, Tommy Kavanagh, and Harry himself, Harry Geraghty,
And they used to rehearse, where was it?
In Henrietta Street. They had a big hall there in Henrietta Street, and they rehearsed there, on stage.
They don't have a stage, right?
They had a stage set up in it, a small stage set up in it as well, It was fabulous.
And what about the Theatre Royal? I mean, obviously there was a lot of characters associated with Theatre Royal.
Oh yeah, you had characters. Every show had its own character. Like the likes of Eddie Wimberry, you had Tommy Fitzgerald. Tommy actually died on stage in here. Great Tommy Fitzgerald. He was with Waterford Crystal at the time, and as he was ready to go on stage, he just dropped down. And Chris Henchy was coming on. Tommy was standing at the side, and Chris was singing, and Tommy collapsed in front of her, and she thought Tommy was always fooling. She thought he was fooling. She kicked him to get up, Fitz. Tommy was dead, you know. But there were great characters, you know, Roger McGrath and all those guys, and as I say, you had Eddie Wimbury. You know, all great characters in the Tops then, you know.
And the men working backstage were kind of interesting.
You had like Larry Quinch. Larry was the guru here backstage. Everyone wanted Larry on their side, you know, because he could make or break you with the curtains and with the drops, you know. He could make or break you, so you had to. I got on very well with Larry, you know, and of course his son Dermot is involved now with Spree and that, or he was involved with Spree, you know. But they were great times, you know, and they were magical times, and the people that came through Tops of the Town was unbelievable. All these like,
and Larry Fanning as well.
Oh, Larry was the one that kept Theatre Royal open, in fairness to him. He and the committee, but particularly Larry. He got any few Bobby could get, he got for the Theatre Royal and kept it open. And I remember when we were at our height in ACC, we put on a show here for 6 nights. Did the best of from the top shows we put on. And Larry, we donated one big night for the Theatre Royal inside because they needed to get stuff in there badly and they hadn't the money. And we did that for him, you know. Yeah. And anybody could help him, did help him, you know. But Larry was.
But the Theatre Royal was very much part of Waterford, wasn't it?
It was the part. That was the hub of everything here.
So
everything theatre was it.
Yeah,
and people grew up through Theatre Royal and grew up on the stage in Theatre Royal, you know. And then Tops of the Town was, I'd say, and you had other shows as well. But back in those days, you hadn't an awful lot of big shows coming to Theatre Royal. Tops of the Town was the big one. Lasted from you know, February, March, April. It was on here, you know, and you could have 10 shows in it, 10 or 12 shows, you know, every, you know. And
there's always been a big interest in musical theatre here in Waterford.
Always, because you had the De La Salle Musical Society, you know, that was the big one back in those days, you know. And they brought over artists from England, top class artists from England to sing here, you know. And then the Edmund Rice then came on board as well. But Waterford was always known as the city of music. I know Denny did it in the song, Denny Corcoran, the late great Denny Corcoran, and it was known as the city of music, you know.
And why was that?
Because people, they grew up with music here. You had a Barrack Street band there for years, you know, and the St. Patrick's band, and music was part of it here in Waterford, and there was always music, and you had so many groups in Waterford as well. You know, when I say groups, I don't mean traditional groups, but ordinary groups, you know, bands and that. And it was always a hub.
And what about the show bands? Would you remember much of that?
Yeah, I remember some of them now. Some of the lads that I knew that joined show bands, you know, the Blue Aces and all those people, and they travelled all over. Some of them were travelling in England playing, you know. It was, they were all fantastic talent in Waterford. Really great, you know. And we still have it today. You know, that was back in the old days, but we still have it today. Like yourself, you're involved with kids and that, and they're brilliant, you know. It's great. And they're going to be the future of Waterford.
Of course.
You know.
They're making documentaries about me in years to come.
Well, I don't know. That's questionable. But anyway, you know, there could be a dark side of you that we don't want to know.
What else would you like to ask?
Can you explain to us what the Tops of Town actually are? Because we have a lot of people talking about them.
Yeah.
In actual terms of
well,
context.
John Players came up with this idea for companies to put on a 1 hour show, just a 1 hour show, a variety show. It had to be a variety show. And if you did an excerpt from a big show like Guys and Dolls and that, you could only do 15 minutes. That was your centrepiece, you know. But companies got involved in this, and from all over Ireland. And it was great for companies because what happened was you had this thing in a company, you had the office and you had the workers. But when the Tops of the Town was in it, they all merged together and they became one. And it was great for that. It was great for relations within the company as well. But everyone got involved and everyone, you know, and you beg, borrow and stole.
So there'd be comedy.
There was music, showpieces, that there was comedy, and there was recitations and all that kind of stuff in it. It was variety, a bit of everything. Not about any particular one, but a bit of everything, you know.
Was it based in Waterford or was it nationwide?
No, it was nationwide. It was nationwide. It came from all over. It was all over Ireland, you know.
It started in Waterford.
It started, 1961. I think it started in Waterford, you know. And Waterford were one of the first to start out. Blair Wills got this idea and they said, would they start? And they started in Waterford, I think, and then it blossomed all over then, you know. And companies all over Ireland got involved. They were from Galway and, you know, every place. And it was great. And some great artists today are started off in Tops of the Town. And then they made their living out of it, then they became professional, you know.
So they cut their teeth.
They cut their teeth from Tops of the Town, yeah.
I mean, we were saying this recently, someone else about Mrs. Brown's Boys, that comedy is quite similar, isn't it?
The very same. Comedy then, we had like the likes of Anne McGrath, Denny was in the comedy, Bula Power and those, and they were all stage comedy. And they were belly laughs. You know, I mean, they had this thing with the Traveller, Bula and Anne, and they used to have 7 or 8 kids with them. You know, the late, great Brian Flynn, he was one of the kids. And they used to have all tattered clothes, you know, and they become looking for a house and that kind of stuff, you know. Or,
Did they make fun of like politics and everything?
oh yeah, that was all part and parcel, you know, and nobody ever took had umbrage to it, but they didn't care anyway, like, you know. But it was pure talent, you know, and that on the stage. I mean, Tops was just magical, you know.
All right. I'm sorry for rushing.
That's
all. Thanks a million.
That's all.
And
Listen,
Patsy, what about...
I link up. I'll tell you what.